Sabrina 2000s comic issue 23. We start out with Sabrina being happy that she made the cheerleading squad. Why would she want to do that when Gem's probably a cheerleader? She's also on the soccer team. That's a lot of things for her to do. She says that she was worried her foot injury wouldn't heal in time for tryouts. Don't remind me of that fucking story. Of all the different stories to reference again. Anyways, there's better things to be pissed off about than a misguided continuity nod. Salem wants to order pizza with extra anchovies. Hilda says she's proud of her as she's hugged, and Sabrina says that she was hoping to visit her friend and tell her good news. It turns out her friend is the one in the wheelchair from last issue. I didn't remember her name because she was only used as a plot device to motivate Sabrina to discover that not having a wheelchair ramp sucks. She didn't have a personality beyond being nice and patient. Even Helen from Sonic X is a better character, because I think her being in a wheelchair is completely superfluous there. Her real character was that she was an adventure-loving girl who was sad that her parents were always too busy with work to spend time with her. So her being in a wheelchair was just something extra to make her more interesting, while Maggie only existed to educate the audience on a problem she has to deal with. So I hope she gets to be an actual character instead of being another Landra situation. Hilda says she'll drive Sabrina to Hanover to visit her. Sabrina says that Hanover and Greendale are big rivals in football, but that shouldn't affect her friendship with Maggie. Does that mean it will? Because what can go wrong does go wrong in this comic. At least here, there's still the chance that Sabrina's right, because Maggie was nothing but a nice, patient person last time. Sabrina goes over to Maggie's house, and for once she's smart because she thought ahead. She's wearing a windbreaker because she doesn't want Maggie to see her opposing cheerleader outfit right away. She thanks Hilda for the ride. So far the story is good enough, with an intriguing suspense that could go either way. Surprisingly, Sabrina shows her cheerleader outfit right after talking to her. So, huh? What was the point of the windbreaker then? I take back the smart thing. Maggie starts crying too quickly to be believable, and fortunately it's not because she's on an opposing team. She says that she had wanted to try out for the cheerleader squad and wasn't allowed. Well, duh. It turns out she did try out, and she makes her wheelchair spin around while doing a cheer. Well, she's a nice character. Once again, she only exists so the story can make a parade about the fact that they have a character in a wheelchair. She only exists in the story to complain about the fact that she's in a wheelchair. And her cheer is cringeworthy instead of actually acting like it doesn't matter if she's like this or not, and ignoring it. She says that while she can't jump or do a somersault, she can at least do this. I'm expected to believe that the reason she's not on the cheerleading squad is that, very stereotypically, it has a really mean cheerleader captain who won't give her a chance. Rather than the obvious reason that her being a cheerleader in this way would be against the rules, because nobody does that. And even if it wasn't, it might still make people sad from pitying her, which is the opposite effect a cheerleader would want to create. She can do a wheelie and spin around, but that's about it. It's sweet of Sabrina to say that was cool and she should be on the squad, but come on. It's so cliche to not only have one mean cheerleading captain in the comic, but two. I don't remember the 70s Sabrina series having mean cheerleaders and a focus on popular girls and cliques in the school setting. It makes it look more well-written and creative. Sabrina says that every school seems to have one. I've never met a mean cheerleader in my entire life. They all seemed fine in my experience. Same goes for the jocks. So this always looks like just a TV cliche that can't be taken seriously. There's mean people in every hobby and job, but this thing is overdone for cheerleaders, who you'd think would be cheery because that's their job, to cheer people up. It was good of Maggie to thank Sabrina. Sabrina says that she should go confront the cheerleading captain. I guess out of desperation to at least try to help her. She thinks that if at least one person takes her side when she tries again, Maggie might have a chance. Even though it's obvious she'll just be outnumbered. It seems like she's just gonna force her to be disappointed all over again, though. Maggie reluctantly tells her mother that she and Sabrina are going out, instead of just saying no. Sabrina goes over to the Hanover cheerleading tryouts, and I'm once again disappointed at the story being even less creative than I thought. I thought only Jem would be rich. But then it turns out that Celeste's family owns half the town. That sounds ridiculous. And her older brother's a star on the football team. At least that's different from Jem. There's no reason for her to be rich too. There goes anything that could have made her interesting. She even has black hair like Jem. This isn't clever, it's lazy. But I guess this is a nitpick because coincidences do happen. It is technically possible to have a Jem equivalent here, but it's a problem because it's a lazy recycling of ideas that's totally unnecessary. You don't need to have another cheerleader who somehow thinks she can run the school. She calls Maggie Wheels, which the comic might as well have called her at this point. It was unnecessarily rude of her to call Sabrina her new chauffeur. I've never seen anyone get made fun of for being in a wheelchair either, so this just seems unrealistic, making not Jem make a fool out of herself with bad social skills. Though I've never seen any student actually interact with one in a wheelchair either, from my recollection. My point is, Celeste thinks she's got power, but with a politically incorrect attitude, she'd end up losing all of her power over people from controversies. At least that's something that's better than Jem. I know Celeste is gonna lose her status eventually, but Jem might not. Sabrina lampshades that Celeste doesn't need to be so nasty, as Celeste is already getting me in a bad mood. Maggie says that's okay and she can handle her. Sabrina and Maggie don't have the best friendship here because Sabrina's too dominant over Maggie and insists on making stupid decisions. Sabrina lampshades that Celeste's attitude towards Maggie is counterproductive to school spirit, and when she's asked what she'd know about it, she ignores Maggie as she takes off her windbreaker to reveal that she's a cheerleader from Greendale, which shocks Celeste. Sabrina tells Celeste epically that she's got a faculty advisor who will be very interested in how she discriminates, or maybe the school newspaper. This would have been epic if she actually carried through with this threat. All Celeste has to do is lie to the football players that Sabrina's a spy that's here to steal plays so they'll lose the big game, and they all chase Sabrina and Maggie out of here. Maggie thankfully does something after all the time of being ignored and spoken for against her own wishes. She uses her wheelchair to make the football players fall over, and one of them thankfully says that it was only trying to scare Sabrina. Sabrina runs away, once again ignoring Maggie's wishes when she asks her to come back. Well, I can't blame her for not wanting to be around Celeste. But this is not what the Sabrina I know would have done. Salem wants to summon some hornets to punish those jerks when he's told about it, and is just told off. Hilda asks Sabrina if she wants to contact Hanover's principal or call Maggie, and Sabrina refuses and becomes a total coward and cries and runs away wanting to just be alone in her room because she doesn't want to even think about that situation that she could have easily brainwashed her way out of or otherwise scared people with magic. She doesn't even know if she wants to be a cheerleader anymore. This kind of gets my sympathy, but I'm also just thinking about what a wuss this comic turned this all-powerful witch into compared to the earlier comics. It's not fair that she's like this just because the art style adds her look younger. This isn't what anybody would have wanted the series to become. Salem feels sorry for her, and Sabrina doesn't want to answer a phone call or several email messages because she's a female version of Antoine now. Zelda says that Sabrina sat in her room all weekend and stayed home sick for 2 days and calls her traumatized. She could have easily just pointed at the football players and brainwashed them into not chasing her. It's also her fault for meddling in Maggie's life. So far it looks like part of the moral of the story is don't meddle in your new friend's life and ignore their wishes repeatedly. And a well-written story would have this be intentional and actually point this out. Hilda lectures Salem to not use too much of his warlock ways to solve this problem, even though they're witches, and that's clearly what you're reading the comic for. What's the point of writing a story where Sabrina might as well be immortal the whole time? Maybe this should have been about Chloe. Salem warps into Sabrina's room and shows her an unrealistic newspaper where Maggie was given a tryout and made the cheerleading squad, even though she'd have to follow her own solo cheerleading routine. And whoever heard of that? I can understand Celeste being disciplined, though it's bad writing to not show us exactly how she was disciplined. So I still feel like she got away with it. I feel like it's very lucky that she did get disciplined, because I don't think that any of the witnesses would have told on her. But there's no way Maggie being on the squad is following the rules. I guess they let her do this because the school thought it was an easy way to make themselves look good. Sabrina thankfully says that she's been overreacting. She says that Maggie's meeting with the school's athletic director today. Salem says she'd love to be a fly on the wall for that, or an invisible silent spirit. The director thanks Maggie for coming in. Maggie says that she's protecting Sabrina from any more stress and is sad that she and Sabrina aren't speaking. Somehow Maggie says she doesn't want any punishment for Celeste. That's terrible writing. Looney Tunes had all the villains get punished. That's such basic good writing. Sure, it shows how nice Maggie is, but you're not supposed to outright enforce the Karma Houdini trope on a heat sink when the hero has the perfect excuse to punish her. Maggie says that she has a quote hanging on her bedroom wall that says that people are all family and have value. Sabrina starts sobbing. This is so cheesy. Sabrina says that she's lucky to have Maggie as a friend because she's a good person. I guess we'll have to wait until next time for her to have her actual character developed. I'm sure this is the type of character that would make actual people like this feel self-conscious because what makes her different is being made a huge deal out of. Salem says that Sabrina's not so bad herself. I thought there'd be a point to them watching this because they'd find out a sad dramatic twist against Maggie. Or they'd get to find out how badly Celeste was punished. But instead the only dramatic twist was that Celeste will get out of any punishment. Salem tells Sabrina that she should renew her friendship with Maggie. The director thanks Maggie for coming to him. Salem warps away, and Sabrina stammers in front of Maggie along with her before they finally hug. Maggie says that she's glad Sabrina and her are pals again. And Sabrina gets an interesting idea. That Saturday afternoon, Sabrina's aunts want to be right by Sabrina when she cheers, being supportive instead of doing their own thing. There's an announcement that in the spirit of good sportsmanship, today's honorary captains are Sabrina and Maggie. Those schools are really just trying to make themselves look good, because otherwise Maggie would never be the captain, let alone a cheerleader. This is kind of an ambitious story with its message, and that's the kind of thing where the moral is delivered in such an annoying, over-the-top way that it even annoys the people who agree with the message. Like the anti-smoking episode in Pinky and the Brain. The two shake hands and prepare for the ceremonial coin toss, and Sabrina puts her hand on her shoulder, as they say, the friendship team that nothing can overcome. That was kind of heartwarming, but isn't Maggie going to be a really rare character because this comic keeps changing the status quo? And they've done everything with her being in a wheelchair. She'll never be as close a friend as Chloe because Sabrina won't tell her anything about her life that has to do with witchcraft. And witchcraft inevitably happens around her, so the two might run out of things to say to each other as pen pals and grow distant. A character needs more than one personality trait. I remember there being a character in Avatar The Last Airbender without the use of his legs, and no big deal about it was made. The focus of the entire plot was on his father. In the comedy page, Sabrina tells Salem to check out a fairy magic book on Zelda's Night Table. Salem tells her to just say no to fairy magic. He says that fairy magic is very hard to control its results, despite expecting me to believe that it's powerful. Why does he think a witch could use fairy magic? And magic is spelled wrong just to try to be different. He tells her to put it back. Why is the guy who took over the world constantly portrayed as the responsible one nagging Sabrina? Because Sabrina's whole character is that she's an idiot, she doesn't take the hint right away like anyone would, and acts overconfident. She uses a glamour spell and looks like a pixie when she says a spell to make her pretty as a pixie. Of course she ends up looking like a pixie. She said the word pixie. She shouldn't have even bothered with that spell. She obviously would have used the witch spell instead. And considering how terrified witches are of fairies in the earlier comics, it's unusual that Sabrina would casually find a fairy spellbook lying around. Why was that book even in the house if Salem doesn't want her to use it? That was forced then. What made Sabrina think she needed to use that book? The next story has Sabrina skating around with Salem in her backpack. Why does he think that counts as exercise? It makes sense if he just said he wanted a fun ride with her. So Sabrina can play soccer, baseball, do cheerleading, and ice skate. And she does regular skating on a whim. That's a lot she had to learn. And it's progressive that she's not being called a tomboy for being so into sports. She says that a kitten's trapped on that traffic island. And of course, she couldn't use magic. Yes, she could. She could just freeze time. Then she could go get the cat without any danger, without revealing magic. She warped Rotunda so she could warp the cat. And realistically, Salem falls out of her bag when she skids to a stop, but that's where the realism ends. Because predictably, she doesn't want to freeze time. Oh good, she does use magic to save it. Because that's the only safe way to do it. And she says that since no one's looking, she can just zap the cat over the cars and catch him. The kid points this out, but his mother just assumes he's lying and ignores him instead of even trying to look. I figured things would go wrong for Sabrina. I was wondering if the cat would scratch her in fear, which would make sense because she just used magic in front of it. Not to mention she's not its owner. Instead, while she somehow misses when she tries to catch the cat, it lands on Salem, and she says, "Nice save." Somehow Salem thinks he might be allergic to cats when he's been a cat and is fine. He's officially the forced comedy character. But I don't hate it as much as I would in the Sonic series because Sabrina was always a comedy from the start, and it'd lose something if it didn't at least try, even if it's not good at it anymore. Sabrina says that the cat is cute and wants to try to find his owner. The cat's surprisingly docile, immediately purring in her arms when he never met her before. That's lucky. She asks Salem to look after the kitten while she makes the Lost Kitten poster. And Salem says he doesn't know anything about kittens, which is supposed to be funny because he looks like a cat now. Even though he's researched other things that had nothing to do with his life, he had plenty of time to research kittens. Sabrina, instead of trying to contact her aunts or uncle and ask them if they know how to look after a kitten, ignores Salem and leaves the cat with him anyways. Has her ignoring Salem's warning ever gone right for her? Salem casts a spell to make a robo-sitter bottle feed the cat. But for no reason, the kitten disappears a panel after he says that everything will be fine, for showing any confidence in himself. And it misses the point of magic if every time people get punished for using it. Unlike in every RPG ever. How did the kitten manage to be fast enough to escape the room quietly while being up in that thing, and only the amount of time it took for Salem to say that small text bubble? Why was he not looking at the kitten the entire time he was saying that? He had no reason to look anywhere else or have his eyes closed. This wouldn't have been forced if he took a nap and there was a time skip. But instead it was rushed. This is just not fair. Salem finds out the kitten climbed the tree for no reason. Somehow, Salem thinks he needs to remember a spell to get him down instead of simply pointing and making the cat float down to him. Sabrina, a novice witch, is better at this. She didn't say a spell to float the cat over to her, did she? Salem's too nervous to think when he should know that cats don't try to get off the trees to get stuck up right away. I guess he's worried the branch will collapse from the weight of the kitten. But seriously, idiot balls are not funny. Somehow he thinks it's a good idea to get onto the branch himself and it breaks under the weight of both of them. But he remembers his parachute spell. Wait, he didn't say anything. How would it be a matter of remembering it? Anyways, he smiles and the kitten hugs him, and he tells him to stop licking him. Then the story ends with him reading a bedtime story to the kitten. We never do see it get reunited with its owner, because the comic space was wasted on Salem being too stupid to be believable. Cutting that out will cut out the whole plot. But the plot could have moved on after Sabrina would have put the poster up and be about something interesting instead. This kind of story wouldn't suck if Salem was how he's supposed to be and unable to use magic. Because then I want to be asking why he's so stupid with his magic. I like that because he's a cat, he told him a story about a wicked old mouse. In the comedy page, Sabrina says these Shakespeare plays are hard to read sometimes. Salem agrees and says that he tried to tell him, but he didn't listen to him. He told him back then that audiences today want action and adventure. He must be lying when he tells Sabrina that he told him box office blockbusters get hip, because those words didn't exist back then. and he says that he suggested that Romeo would turn out to be a cyborg. I guess the other realm had cyborgs, or the fictional concept of them in its media, as well as blockbusters, even back then. I'd rather Romeo turn out to be a cyborg than kill himself. Then it's totally forced that Sabrina expects me to believe Salem didn't let her finish and was going to say that it's worth it to read Shakespearean plays. She's a dumb teenage girl, she'd be miserable with them. And Salem stupidly tries to quote Shakespeare while changing it to sound cat-like. I think nearly all of his jokey lines have been complete failures. At least if Romeo turned out to be a cyborg, he could have had some cool powers to add to the story. In the next story, Hilda wishes that Sabrina hadn't worn her witch hat to the fair. This just makes me miss the 70s series, where they would celebrate that. Zelda paranoidly thinks that someone might suspect that she's a real witch, being totally out of touch with modern society. Sabrina has no reason to do this. I wish she explained that she was wearing this out of witch pride, instead of having the thin excuse that a lot of people her age wear goofy hats. No, they don't. Aside from backwards baseball caps, which have been out of fashion for a long time. We do see that she's right in this story. Then a kid squirts her with water, and fortunately his mother calls him out as he looks sad and tells her that she's sorry. And her son still thinks he's at the wacky, wild witch house. The guy working there tells the crowd that they all hate witches, and says some stereotypes about them from The Wizard of Oz. Since when is there an attraction like this at a fair? It seems like it's only happening because this is Sabrina. He suggests throwing something at a bullseye and dunking the wicked witch into the brew. Zelda stupidly risks blowing her cover by saying that she's not ugly. And Sabrina says that she doesn't have a wart, she has a zit. Why the hell aren't the people in front of them reacting and being confused at them? They're not even trying to hide that they're witches. This is stupid of them after all the time they've lived on Earth. Them acting this way would make more sense for the 70s comic. Hilda gets mad, and when the witch caricature gets dunked on the first try, miraculously, Hilda wants to zap that witch-hating wuss when he doesn't know witches exist, though he'd hate them even more if he did know. Too bad she doesn't zap Quigley. And Zelda and Sabrina hold her back. Finally, she has a distinct personality from them, because she does have a more hot temper. She thinks she's allowed to use magic, but never Sabrina. Sabrina idealistically thinks that Wally only hates witches because he doesn't know any real ones, even though he'd probably be freaked out by witches. Is she forgetting that she can't reveal she's a witch or else? Instead, there's a time skip to that evening as Wally's about to have dinner with the family. Shouldn't they know after all their experience that there's a reason they can't reveal their witches? In the sitcom, Sabrina was told by the Witches' Council that she'd get punished if she told an untrustworthy mortal about her powers. But it actually makes more sense that this isn't the case in the comic, if every witch can erase memories at will. The dumb ants should know that they're just risking getting themselves riled up when they ask Wally what he'd do to a real witch. I guess he's only joking when he says he'd dunk her, because he should know that he wouldn't get to do that to a witch. He screams when he sees Sabrina fly on a broom, as Zelda says that she's rather nice. What were they expecting? Wally's told that witches really don't cook in big black pots. Have you not read the 70s comic? I actually grew to like that because it made the comic stand out. What other comic book has a beloved main character do that all the time? It makes sense that most witches prefer the microwave. She says that if you wanted to dunk a witch in her own pot, it'd be a problem. I wish it was explained that the reason these people completely give up on trying to befriend him and just let Hilda magically dunk Wally in their swimming pool is because they realized that befriending him was hopeless. But Chloe gets startled by magic too. Zelda tells him as they're all in the pool to stop dunking witches and change his opinion of them. He has no reason to stop hating them now because now they're a real threat and will just casually use their magic against him. The story ends with him letting himself get dunked at the fair, without wearing swimming gear for some reason. He was taught that modern witches are modern, not really that they're good. It's so interesting that the story doesn't end with them forgetting about witches, and there's no implication that they got punished for revealing magic to him. For once, this was an actual Sabrina story, as in one full of magic, so this might actually be one of the awesome ones. I guess the story's supposed to make sense because it's been so long since the days when these people had to get used to tolerating witch hatred that seeing it again made them get riled up. and they forgot their habit of not letting it spur them to action. If they acted like this every time, then they would have had a hard time when everyone believed in witches. The first story, by Mike Gallagher, is about Sabrina visiting Maggie, since she's actually not just a one-shot, just to find out that she wanted to try out for the cheerleading squad and got turned down. Somehow, because the story wants to have a message about acceptance, she wasn't turned down because it's obviously against the rules for someone in a wheelchair to have her own cheerleading routine in the squad. Instead, it's because the cheerleader captain was a big meanie. As if that's creative. She traumatizes Sabrina by getting the football players to scare her, which is obviously not how it would go. Instead, Sabrina would traumatize them. And she never gets punished because somehow Maggie decides to let her off the hook, which was terrible writing. I already knew that she was a nice person. So this doesn't make her a character, it makes her a Mary Sue, and a sympathetic Sue because she's only there to elicit pity, and be inspirational. It's awkward to have a character that's different be all about how she's different, instead of actually being a character. Just seeing that she's way is enough, and that's just a foundation. Eventually, she talks the athletic director into letting her join the squad anyways. It was sweet how she and Sabrina reconciled and had nice moments. It seemed ridiculous that she was made fun of. Maggie's just there to have an ambitious message that's preaching to the choir anyways. What are her hobbies? Does she care about anything besides cheerleading? Does she do well in school? Sabrina got into trouble because she tried to meddle in her life against her wishes. But it turns out that worked out for Maggie. So instead of the story's moral being that maybe people should listen to disadvantaged people and respect their wishes instead of meddling and speaking for them when they're clearly nervous, it all worked out for Sabrina and Maggie in the end, and Sabrina's never actually called out on ignoring her wishes. The ends justify the means in this story. Never mind that they've still got an issue in their friendship that isn't being addressed. I respect that Maggie didn't give up despite her meekness making it in character for it to. So she's determined. In the second story, by Angelo, Sabrina saves a kitten from cars with her magic, thankfully, and Salem's somehow too stupid to just levitate the cat off the tree branch. At least he saves it from the fall with a parachute spell. But how to get out of his sight and get there so fast? That was the whole plot? The third story was about Sabrina's family surprisingly revealing to a guy that they're witches after he dunks a witch dummy at the fair instead of letting it go, like modern witches trying to hide their secret would actually do. It was confusing that they let it get to them because people are supposed to not know that witches exist. But it made for an interesting story, and I loved that so much magic was used in the story with no nagging about it. This was easily the best story in the issue.